This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Today I'm going to review the market trends for Fox Body Mustangs, see which ones have appreciated the most in the last 3 years, review the Dennis Collins collection, and see if it was a better investment than the stock market. And I will recommend which ones you should buy now. Not necessarily as an investment, as we'll see here shortly. So if you're more of a visual person, be sure to check out this podcast on our YouTube channel where you will see all of the charts, graphs, and data I talk about during this Fox Body Mustang market moment. A special thanks to Sports Car Market for providing a platinum database subscription. This gives me even more data to dig into, which you will see here momentarily. I will have our first ad for the podcast in Sports Car Market's December issue, so be sure to keep an eye out for it. It looks exactly like what you're looking at on the screen right now. And as always, you can see all of the cool car places I visit while traveling across the U.S. on my Instagram handle at the Collector Car Podcast. And be sure to click on the Instagram stories as I've been posting more videos there. I try to do a couple a week, and those only last like 24 hours. So you kind of got to see them, and then you're gone. I don't understand how it works. I'm getting a lot more views on my stories by total strangers that I've never linked to or liked any of their stuff in the past, so I'm not quite sure how that works. So a transcript of this episode will be posted as a blog at www.thecollectorcarpodcast.com with all of the hyperlinks activated so you can explore and visit the websites and read the articles I mentioned. So now onto some cool cars. So I have a love for all things Mustang. I've been listening to this podcast, you know that. And you can see my Taproot car by watching the Simpler Times Petrolicious video. That video featured my 1966 Mustang convertible 4-speed A-code 4-barrel limited slip differential 4 owners from new that I hated to sell, but I sold it a little bit over a year ago. And my Taproot car, that's the car that started all this craziness, can be seen in one of the pictures in the video. So if you look at the video, you look for the pictures, there's a bunch of photographs spread out on a table. You'll see a picture of a 1966 red fake GT convertible. You can tell it's fake because it has the GT side stripes, but it also has the side ornamentation that is not correct. And it doesn't have the fog lights. And it doesn't have the trumpet exhaust. So it was a totally fake GT, but I fell in love with it anyways, because I didn't know what a GT was at the time. And then next to that picture, actually below that picture, you can see my first car, the first car I ever bought in my life, a 1968 Mustang Coupe, red interior, 3-speed, 6-cylinder with an exhaust leak. I spent $1,000 on it, bought it sight unseen on the word of my cousin. Then it turns out it didn't have an engine, but he was a great guy. He put an engine in it. And he was shocked that I actually made it 3 hours home later that day. So I don't know about that. So anyways, you can see both of those. And then while I was falling in love with the first generation Mustang, 2 buddies of mine received new GTs when they graduated or for their senior year of high school. They both got 1989 Mustang GTs. One guy got a black one guy got a white one. I totally hated them. No, I didn't. They're really good guys. I will have to say I was a little bit jealous. And that was Brett and Jason. As far as I know, Brett still has his black GT. I don't know what kind of shape it's in, but I heard he still has it. So the first Mustang that Fox Body Mustang that I actually fell in love with was a 1986 GT Coupe. Now, I fell in love with this one because it was actually the first Mustang I ever drove. This was before I bought the 68, and it was the first 5.0 Mustang I ever drove. Now, this is my Taproot Fox Body Mustang. And it was during college. One of the resident assistants, Ken Rinaldi, at Cash Hall in Tallahassee, Florida, while I was going to Florida State, he owned it. And he let me drive it around the parking lot a little bit. I drove it in the underground garage, so the stock exhaust sounded a lot more menacing than it really was. And, of course, I loved it. I don't ever really recall driving it again, but it really did make a big impression. He was very fastidious about it. It was an immaculately kept car. And at that time, it was only 3 or 4 years old. Now, the Fox Body Mustangs have 2 distinct subclasses. One is 1989 to 1986 quad headlight cars, meaning they had 4 headlights, 2 in each bucket. And the other one was the 1987 to 1993 square headlight Mustangs, or single headlight Mustangs. And there's additional differences I want to mention here as well. So for the quad headlight cars, they were all carbureted except for 1986, where they transitioned to fuel injection. And they were powered by a variety of turbo 4s, 6-cylinders, and 8-cylinder engines, and pretty much they were all low on power. These cars are more difficult to restore as there's not a strong aftermarket parts supplier, so it's hard to get some parts from some model years. And they changed models quite a bit. They're trying to figure things out. They weren't very consistent in these early years of the Fox body Mustang. As far as the square headlight cars, these had less variations over the years, which made it a little bit easier to for the aftermarket suppliers to provide some cool stuff to hot rod them up. And Ford was really focused on increasing the power in the 5.0-liter V8. So these were hot rodded like crazy, and it's difficult to find one that is unmolested and original today. So these transitioned over to the fuel injection, as I said before, in 1986, and continued on through 1993. Now, for the purposes of this evaluation, I'm not going to include Capris, Roushes, McLarens. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's not McLaren, like the supercars, McLarens, SSPs, or other non-factory cars, with the exception of Salines. So the Salines, I'm including those because they sold quite a bit of them. There's some of them in the database where I can track some of the dollar result sales from auctions. And their trend, the market trend, has been pretty robust, pretty strong along the lines of the Cobra and the Cobra R. So those were included. Also, in my mind, those are the prettiest Salines ever. I just don't think they ever really enhanced the Mustangs after the Fox body generation, personally. So no hate mail, please. So Fox body Mustangs are finally getting to in the marketplace. And a recent and very visible result included the collection of Fast and Loud's Miss Collin, who sold off a bunch of them at 2 different auctions. So he auctioned off 5 Fox body cars in 2017, and they averaged about $54,000, which is a ton of money. And 18 cars in 2018, which averaged $30,000. So these were high dollar results. A lot of these broke records, and they made national headlines at the time. Their articles are all over the place. Now, the one that was really a shocker was a 1990 7-Up convertible that sold for over $80,000. So a whole lot of money for a GT convertible, of which they made over 4,000 of them. So a lot of cool stuff to dig into here. So I will review these more in depth in a moment. And it may at first look like these sold for a lot of money, and they did, but I'm going to dive into the numbers and see which one was really a good investment, if any of them. So to do this, I want to look at the market as a whole. So my data is from, as I mentioned before, Sport Car Market, Platinum Database, as well as from Hagerty. So for the entire run of Fox bodies, the average price by auction year went up 268%, which sounds really amazing. However, the first year of record was 1993, and the average price was under $5,000. So it was really low at the time that they started tracking these results. And by 2019, the average price was $18,000. So that was a big increase in, 16 years. So there was a lot of factors in this, including more cars coming to auction, more higher dollar cars coming to auction. Inflation had a piece of it. And then we had a lot more auctions. The auction industry as a whole grew. So there was a lot more Fox body Mustangs coming to the market. Now, if you break this up by the 2 different generations of quad car, you see the most is coming from that area. The average went from less than $4,000 to around $14,000, which represented a 242% growth. Now, for the later cars, growth is only about 40%, but the dollar base was much higher. At $13,000, it ended around $18,000. So that means they depreciated less after initial purchase, because they started tracking these cars in, looks like about 1998. So some of these cars were only 5 years old, so they were still depreciating some. And if you're watching the video, it's pretty cool because you can actually see the depreciation go back up when the cars are about 10 years old is when they started to appreciate back up. So they went from $13,000 to around $18,000 on average from an auction price perspective. Now, when we look at the values of particular models, the data gets even more interesting. So over its entire run, the base GT, its value has increased from just over $10,000 to about $13,000. I'm sorry, to about $23,000, which is 110% change. The value of a base GT for quad cars about $1,000, and then for the square Mustangs was $20,000. So the later cars make sense, have a higher value. The Cobras are another story. The quad Cobras averaged around $22,000, while the square Cobras, the '93 Cobra, was $50,000, and the Cobra R was a real standout with its value for number one condition being around $95,000. So buy them now while you can. One example is Cobra R number 73, only had 589 miles, sold for $132,000 in April of 2019. I don't think that'll be repeatable for quite a while, honestly. So now let's look at what's appreciated in the last 3 years. So I'm going to review these from the lowest to the highest increase in value. As a baseline, I picked out my Taproot car, my 1986 GT, which has not appreciated much at all, at only 0.7. So basically it stayed flat the last 3 years. The 1984 Mustang GT350 grew 4.5%. This is kind of a cool car. It was celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Mustang. It was commemorative of the original GT350s, which they didn't really make convertibles. I mean, they made 4 in 66. Those don't really count. Then there was 1 in 67. That might have been a GT500. And then 1968 is when it came into full production. So they made over 5,200 of these, but only 104 of them were turbo GT350 convertibles. So it's not a fast car, but it's a cool car. So if you ever see one of those turbo GT350, especially the convertibles, you want to buy those up. It's thought that between hatchbacks and convertibles, there were only 350 of them. So that's a pretty rare car. The next one is the 1979 Indy Pace car. This one's pretty iconic with the paint scheme and the decal graphics, the orange decals of the horses running. So this one went up 10.3%. They made about over 10,000 of them. So they're not really rare. They're not quick, but they're cool. So that's cool. The next one we'll look at is a 1986 SVO. This Turbo 4. These have really started to appreciate. Built from 84 to 86 by the Special Vehicle Operations Team. These had anywhere from 175 to 205 horsepower out of a 2.3 liter engine. And pretty cool looking. Had a limited slip, 4-wheel disc brakes, had cool wheels, cool front end, special hood, and it had like the special spoiler in the back. So it's a pretty cool car. The next one we'll look at is an 85 GT convertible. I always thought these were really good looking. This one actually has gone up 19.5%. This is the last of the carbureted cars, but looked like the 86. 85s were appreciating a little bit more in the last 3 years. And then the next one we're going to look at is a 1992 GT convertible. And I picked this one out for a couple reasons. One, it grew 23.9%. But then also I wanted to give a call out to two of the special variations. So one of them I mentioned before was the 7-Up Mustang convertible. This is one that was some type of failed marketing don't ignore that. Promotion, and they needed to do something. And so they made these like emerald green convertibles with white interior, white top, white wheels, really cool. They built over 4,000 of them, so they're not extremely rare, but they're pretty cool. And then the rare one is the 1992 Mustang Summertime. So same idea, but it was red instead of green. So red with white wheels, white interior, white top. They had a lot less of those, about 2,200 of them. So my point here is that if the 92 5.0 base GT convertible went up about 30%, these two special edition cars probably went up a lot more, as seen by the $82,500 one that was sold by Dennis Collins' collection. The next one we're going to look at is one of my favorites, 1993 Saleen SC hatchback, grew at 24.2%. And along with that is the convertible version, and that grew about 28.7%. A little bit of mixed info on these. Apparently there was only 5 made. Some say it was 2 convertibles and 3 hatchbacks. Others say it was 3 convertibles and 2 hatchbacks. Did I just say that right? Anyways, there are only 5 of them made between the two. So really cool cars, really rare. And then the next one, again from 1993. 1993 was a banner year for Mustangs that have been appreciating, is the Cobra. grew at 29.8%. And then the big dog is the Cobra R, which grew at 30.5%. So the Cobra R is a souped-up Cobra with a stronger suspension, bigger wheels and tires, and brake upgrades. It just has a little bit more horsepower, not a lot. They took out the fog lights to make them air intakes for the engine, and there are only 107 of them built. So it's extremely rare, not a lot out there. I was telling a friend of mine about this podcast I was doing. He's like, well, there's only 106 now, because he actually witnessed one of them get totaled on a track. So to save weight, they pulled out the AC, as well as any creature comforts, deleted the rear seat. All power options were taken out. So said it saved about 400 pounds. So a couple others to watch out for, just as an FYI. Apparently, in the SVO world, there was a sage green one made. They only made 47 of them. And apparently 20 of those were made and marketed as Hertz rental cars. So those are really rare. And then 80 to 81 Mustang Cobras had the turbo as well, which is cool. So now let's talk about Dennis's collection. So when you crunch the numbers, the record-breaking prices from his collection, they were a losing proposition. So I want to preface this by saying I don't know how and when he bought these. I'm going to make the assumption, I think he came from a car dealer family, so I'm going to make the assumption they just scrolled him away from new, so they would have paid, invoice price. I'm going to project out at list. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to see what would the investment return been if he had put the dollars not in Mustangs, but in the stock market. So for example, if you were to invest $1 in the stock market in 1983, so I'm looking at, if he was going to buy 1983 GT, instead took the money, put it in the stock market, that $1 from 1983 in 2019 would be worth $8.74. Stock market was really down that year. So the price on a 1983 GT Mustang was $9,328. And the return on that, if you had put it into the stock market in 1983, today would be over $81,000. So a lot of money. So now he sold a 1983 GT for $33,000. So here's where the math gets a little unfortunate. I guess that's the best way to put it. So he would have made an additional $8,000 if he had invested in the stock market. And you could say, well, he had a car, he had fun, he drove it around. These were really low-mile cars. I want to say that this one maybe had 6,000 miles on it, 5,000 miles on it. So not a lot of miles and not a lot of fun. So let's look at the entire kit and caboodle. So if he had bought all these cars new, he would have invested $311,000. Now this is buying them new in the year that they bought them. So in 83 and 83 and 89 and 89. And this would have been investing the money at the same time. So he would have invested the money in 83 if it was taken from an 83 Mustang. You get the idea. So after the dust settled from both auctions, he netted out $834,000. Now that's not counting auction fees, storage, AC, for the storage units, all that kind of stuff. So his initial investment had a 168% return, which sounds great, but it's not. If he had invested the same amount of money in the stock market, he would have netted out $1.7 million, which would have been about a 450% return. The only car that came close to making a better return was the record-breaking, unrepeatable 7-Up convertible that sold for $82,900. Even in this example, the stock market would have given you an additional $101. So he ended up basically losing over half of what he made. So if he had invested that money, he would have made an additional $874,000 on top of the $834,000 he got from the auction. So what's the message here? Don't be a speculator. Buy what you love and drive the heck out of it. So what would I recommend that you buy now? I recommend you buy the turbos. As more and more of today's cars become turbo-powered, enthusiasts will want the original turbos for their collection. It'll be about the technology and not the power. Buy up the SVOs, the 84 GT350s, the Cobra turbos, wherever you can find them. And this is not limited to Mustangs. If you look out the trends on other turbo models, such as the BMW 2002, the Toyota Supra, and the Porsche 944, you will see where the Mustang trend is going. So for the 944 Turbo, it's up like 37% the last 3 years. The Toyota Supra is up like 37.5%. The BMW 2002 Turbo is up almost 43%, so it's been on a tear. Now, the Cobra R's and Salines SCs will always be worth a lot, so do not expect them to decline. So basically right now, when these might be declining, they're not, because folks that want these cars are getting more disposable income and they're buying them up. So I don't think these will go down. Now, if they do, it won't be a lot. And I'd recommend buy your Taproot Mustang. So I will always be on the lookout for a really nice, clean, red 1986 GT. So that's all for this week. Thank you for joining us on our first market moment. If you agree, disagree, or need to correct me on an errant fact, please respond to my blog, comment on Instagram, or DM me directly. I will definitely respond. I actually want to have a guest, a Fox Body expert, to watch this, review this, and then be a guest and tell me everything I got wrong so we can be as accurate as possible. As always, keep your foot on the gas and the tires pointed straight. I'll talk to all of you next week. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.